Okay, we're recording. So before we start, welcome to Thinking Space. Today we have three presentations from our PhD students on Indonesian topics. So it should be really interesting. But I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of Australia and of the area where I'm presenting this, or where I'm chairing this. So I'd like to pay respects to the Eora of the Gadigal Nation, the Gadigal of the Eora Nation, and of their elders, past and present. So I know many of us are in different places, including outside of Australia. So we acknowledge it as it's relevant to us. Okay, the first presentation today is Linda Susilowati. Unfortunately, Linda is going to have to, well, fortunately or unfortunately, Linda's going to have to present on Zoom because she's not feeling particularly well today. So Linda, I'll leave it to you to start. Each of the presentations will be for about 20 minutes and then we will have questions, okay? So please go ahead and share your screen.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Okay, I'll try to share my screen. Okay, I can see that from there. Okay, so thank you, Bob, for preparing everything, and thank you for everyone for joining these presentations. I apologize that I cannot be there because of this flu, and also I apologize in advance if you will hear me coughing, sneezing, or waving tissue all the way in the middle of presentations. So today I'm giving presentations on gender dynamics in rural area transformations. This is part of my research proposal. My supervisors are Jeff Nielsen and Sophie Weber, and I will do my fieldwork hopefully this November. So I'm looking forward to hearing all your feedbacks and inputs, especially because human geography is quite new for me. My background is psychology, so I need to learn a lot. I believe that this time it will be a great opportunity to learn. So it's only 20 minutes, so I hope I can make it brief. So hold on a second. Okay, I will start discussing the background of this research proposal with the issue of the world's rural poor. This data from various sources, as you can see there. The data show that the global populations living in rural areas is over 40%, and 4 out of 5 its people live below the international poverty line, and the poverty head-count ratio in rural areas is 2-3 times bigger than in urban areas, and the poverty gap is also higher. And if we talk about the world's poor populations, the percentage of the world's poor populations living in rural areas is about 79%. That means most of the world's poor are living in rural areas. So, but the world's rural poor struggle not only with low incomes, but also many other struggles with inequality issues, discriminations based on class, gender, religions, and because of those issues, rural development is then considered important, especially for countries with a significant rural population, such as Indonesia. Development in rural areas is expected to enable rural people to improve their economy and reduce inequality. So as the development progresses, the transformations of the rural areas therefore is definitely unavoidable. Okay. So when we talk about rural transformations, most of the time we also going to mention about agrarian change, because rural transformations is often seen as changing process in agriculture sector. This might be related to the general assumption that agriculture is a as essential for rural livelihood, and rural transformation is explained by many as a process which there is economic diversifications, and where rural communities reduce their dependency on agriculture and expand their off-farm opportunities. Although some also noted that rural transformation can involve an increasing in agriculture productivity. So rural people expand their off-farm opportunities, changing their livelihood, looking for better income and better life. In the case where the poverty is rural areas, where in rural areas is significant, the changing of rural livelihood is possibly happening in attempts to provide households' basic needs and become part of strategies of rural people to out of poverty. Okay, so according to Ian Scones, and also mentioned in the World Bank's 2016 report on rural households and their pathways out of poverty, there are some considered pathways out of rural poverty, and they include the process of rural livelihood change as rural people strategy to survive. So there are three main categories. First is through rural labor market and rural non-farm economy. And then the other one is migration, and the last one farming. So in the past 2 decades, the non-farm sector, which come along with industrializations, has contributed to rural poverty reductions. So like, for example, international labor organizations in 2020 noted that labor force participation in rural area is higher than in urban areas. It also appeared in the report that in the global south countries, where the general income is generally lower, rural people have a higher tendency to participate in labor force. So kind of like rural labor markets become a driver of employment. Okay, but today I will not discuss much about rural labor market. I'll discuss about rural urban migration instead, so leaving behind for a better life. There are factors affecting rural people's decision to migrate, and it can be extreme events like natural hazard or war or socio-political situations, discrimination or inequality issues, but most frequently mentioned as the main reason for rural people deciding to migrate is the economy. So as we know that rural people are vulnerable to poverty and hunger, which is driving people to migrate from rural areas to find a better life. So being successful person become a familiar motive that we can find in rural areas regarding migration decisions. So sending members from low-income family to work in urban areas, which are mostly in non-agricultural sectors, is considered the key of overcoming financial and food security issues in rural households. So people migrate to seek a way out of poverty, and when they find better job opportunities and incomes, they can live a better life. And moreover, they can help those left behind in rural areas through remittances, like parents, their children, other family members. So I remember there is a saying I heard once when I was in a village, or not only once, many times. So like, if the migrants become successful in the city, so will their left behind families in the village, because they're relying on remittances. So many scholars, Jonathan Rick, for example, he many times mentioned that remittances contribute to rural development. So migration can help to reduce poverty, and even in extreme cases, such as damage caused by natural disaster. Remittances can also contribute to recovery process of construction of the migrants' place. So remittances sent to the household in the village to their parents, family members, and it generally sent to migrants' parents or families for daily expenses, according to many reports from UNESCO, like UNDP. And it is usually allocated for daily expenses like the food, health, education, or even for their children who stays in a village. So when urban areas offer higher income, better livelihood, and broader job opportunities, it is understandable that people in rural areas start to invest in migration to improve their financial capacity. In many cases, rural people even willing to invest in education with the expectation that an education degree will expand their children's chance to find a better job in urban areas. Sorry. So in the last 3 decades, massive changes have taken place in many Indonesian rural areas, including Java, an island with the highest population density in Indonesia. And migration has become an essential part of the village economy. There is a large scale of migration across Java, but geographic distribution of migrants is somewhat uneven. So specific areas become suppliers of migrants, and the other sites become the most favorable destination areas. Like this one, data from BPS Indonesia shows that in Java, the highest percentage of population reduction due to lifetime migration is in central Java. And the highest migration flows are usually into Jakarta or Greater Jakarta, or what we call in Bahasa Indonesia, Jabodetabek, Jakarta, Bogor, Depok, Tangerang, Bekasi. Okay. In this kind of case, migrants can be a burden to density. So look at this picture, the one on top. Many migrants in Jakarta. This picture shows a phenomenon called mudik or pulang kampung. Mudik or pulang kampung can be literally translated as going back home or going back to hometown. But there is a huge wave when it comes to Eid Mubarak or Idul Fitri. It's the biggest and the longest public holiday in Indonesia. And it's kind of a cultural thing that people feel that they must spend their Eid with their big family. It's like Christmas here. So even though I'm not Muslim, I still visit my relatives in the village every year when it comes to it. So migration flow from rural to urban, it creates pattern in Java where money from urban transform to rural areas. And there is also a phenomenon called seasonal migrations, where migrants work in the big cities but return in their villages when the contract's work is over or when it comes to harvest season. So the question is, because the transformations and other non-farm work opportunities are available, there is a question about whether farming is still a way of living for rural people. So from other perspective, migration impacts might be seen as negative due to loss of family labor in agriculture sector. So migration can also put the left behind children's well-being at risk when their parents, especially mothers, migrate. Although remittances can contribute to children's financial support. So it's a kind of tricky situations because by migrating, they become financially capable of supporting their families, sending them money. But at the same time, they put their family welfare at risk because they have to leave their children in the village. So a sudden large-scale long-term migration from village can impact agriculture production and risk the food security in that area. So there is a possibility like that. So for households that rely on family farming system, the loss of the family members to migration can bring a more substantial challenge to human resources on the farm. So, besides, agriculture is no longer the primary income for many households in some rural areas in the global south. The livelihood strategies tend to change to support their household economy, well-being, and food security. So when agriculture activities are no longer enough to support the household's economy, people will look alternative or additional sources. So by the time going, farm work is considered as a low status job. Rural agriculture becomes marginal activity, and besides, there are alternatives for job opportunities. So I heard many times, when my relatives in the village told their children that, don't be a farmer because you can get a better job. So there's a lot of people say that. I heard that many times. But the question is, will the agriculture sector be completely abandoned because of the changing livelihood, of this changing livelihood? Is their way of living completely changing? So Jonathan Rick in 2020 in his book, Rural Development in Southeast Asia, and also in many other of his publications, noted cases where smallholder farmers in Southeast Asia countries are persistent in holding their land ownership and running their their farms during agriculture transformation in rural areas. Well, that's including Indonesia. So they keep their land, even though they do not own or operate sufficient land to meet their household needs. So even though alternative job or opportunities are available, and even when agriculture is no longer major activities in their areas, and even when farming becomes increasingly considered as a low status work. So for many rural people in Southeast Asian countries, even though farming maybe no longer become an essential part, but it may still be part of the lives of others whom they were emotionally and existentially connected. So farming maybe no longer be an essential part of younger generation life. So they usually prefer a job with a better income, but youth people still respect and emotionally connected with their parents. Therefore, we can see that smallholders persistent in Southeast Asia countries is more emotional related. Yeah, especially a country like Indonesia, like us. We, since a long time ago, we proclaim ourselves as an agrarian nation or agrarian country. So yeah, even though by many indicators, we're no longer agrarian country. So the persistence of smallholder farmers in Indonesia can be noted by this data, like 7 million existing farmers holding less than 2 hectare farm areas, and it can be shown that like so many smallholder farmers in Indonesia. So the livelihood diversification can help rural people gain better income. That fact actually makes many rural households with smallholder farms keep running their farms while performing other livelihood activities. So many of the young people in Indonesia look for non-agriculture work, and then the family left behind running their farms, and the remittances from those who migrates help them to continue their rural livelihood. One second. Okay, well, I got your message. We're still along. Okay. So One research center in Java also found that young people migrate and those who stay in villages are not attracted to farming, and the remaining agricultural workers in Java, so most of them are middle-aged or elderly. So they keep their farmers until they're no longer capable, and then they gonna pass their farms to their children. So Jeff Nielsen, who I believe is joining us today, I don't know, I can see him, is in one of his papers mentioned that although rural people in Indonesia generally prioritize non-agricultural income for their wealth, from their wealth and life improvement, they still consider agriculture as a backup livelihood strategy. So, okay, I'm just gonna skip some of the data. So the transformation of rural areas is unavoidable, and it's increasingly affected by relationship with cities, bringing in cultural and social change alongside economic change. But economic development brings cultural and social change, including changing society's cultural framework and impacting individual behaviors. So, but even though it brings a lot of changes in terms of cultural and social cultural, but other cultural values still endure and remain an autonomous influence on society. So this is like the research found that there is like empirical evidence from that shows about the changing of the social norm due to economic and development, shifting from agrarian to urban industrial society. But they also found that the influences of some traditional value system is unlikely to disappear. Okay, and one notable society cultural change that might be seen during rural transformation is the generalization in the rural community. Okay, I'll skip this one. So in a global south country, women are taking essential role in agricultural activities, like compromising about 43% of the rural labor force, and then also engage in non-agriculture economic activities to ensure their family's well-being. And they also ensure their family's financial security by diversifying sources of income, including those that require migrations. As a matter of fact, women constitute like around 50% of the total international migrants populations, and the number tend to be higher in the global south country. And so how about rural women in Indonesia? It's pretty much the same with the global south countries and other Southeast Asia countries. So in lower income countries in Southeast Asia, like most of them are, the portion of people living in rural areas is bigger. So in that case, women's role could be more significant, could be even more significant. So for example, in Indonesia, there are vulnerability rate of populations of poverty still higher in rural areas and in urban areas. And in that case, women also take crucial role in domestic work, running households, supporting their children educations, and even looking after for elderly. So this is like the cases running Java pretty much. I'm going to skip that because I don't have much time. So this is the cases where it's like women's having like important roles in rural transformation or rural development. So despite their contribution, rural women in Indonesia still face many challenges and inequalities. Like Indonesia's gender equality index is even among the highest in the Southeast Asian countries. So based on UNDP 2022 reports, and also quoted by the Jakarta Post at the same here. This is like the statistics. Okay. So as maybe all of you or most of you know that rural women have been dealing with lack of with many inequality issues, like lack of access to productive resources, lack of access in assets, information technologies, and Also, like in agricultural related job and non-agricultural agriculture work, even though in those aspect, like the wage gap tends to favors men instead of women. Oh my God, I'm sorry. And women are also often left out of social capital. So, for example, decision making in a farmers organization, workers union, or kind of like organization which include community decision making. So when I invite like farmer groups, they usually like the one who comes as a representative of their household is a man. So migration might open opportunities for women to make it possible for them to have a better income. But even though in migrations, the decision making related regarding to which related to migration is also limited. So there is a limitation on women involved in decision making progress regarding their migration. So even though they want to migrate, it's like there is some limitations, like how far they can go. The idea of they have to stay pretty close with their families. This kind of limitations still happening. So gender and traditional norm in rural Java. So there is an argument that women's inequalities are rooted in the cultural norms that already exist from generation to generations. So in Central Java's rural areas, for example, there is a strong Javanese and religious beliefs influence many aspects of its people lives. So even including the division between women and men. So in the household and agriculture sector, of course, there's like a lot of social cultural factors affecting day-to-day activities. As this is I quote a statement by Mentik, like religion occupies every aspect of life in Indonesia. And so despite all the improvements in the transformations, there are some traditional values that will still stay there. A Japanese woman, for example, occasionally hold public office, but still it's more difficult for rural Java women to become influential leaders and gain access to significant societal roles. Of course, there is an exception for people from high social status. Megawati, for example, like she's the first woman president of Indonesia. But for example, there is a head of neighborhood in Indonesia called Ketua Rukun Tetangga or Ketua RT. So it usually selected by the neighborhood. In Indonesia, if it's female, we call it Ibu or Bu. And when it's male, we call it Bapak or Pak. So like it's honorific in English, like Pak for Mr. and Bu for Mrs. But what happens is almost no actual Mrs. Head of neighborhood of Indonesia's rural areas. However, whoever becomes Mrs. Head of neighborhood or Bu RT is because her husband is selected as the head of neighborhood first, and not the other way around. So in English culture, like I can give example, like when people get married, a woman takes her husband's family name, but it cannot work the other way around. So in Javanese, there is two terms after marriage when rural Java, rural women married. There is two terms that usually used for Javanese women, konco winking and macak manak masak. So the term konco winking can be interpreted as a friend who stays in the back or a friend in the behind. So the konco winking means friend or partner. Okay, I think I have to. Please finish now. Okay, I'll just skip. So there is like these terms. These terms are regarding to Indonesian Javanese culture about limiting women's role in the public sphere. Okay.
And that I'm going to finish up fairly quickly because we don't have much.
I'll be finished in probably 1 or 2 minutes. So, like many traditional gender norms and patterns are rigid and most of the time place women into disadvantaged position. And in Japanese, this happen a lot. So, however, gender norms can and do change along with social transformations. And since the role transformation is something inevitable and cultural norms which affect the inequalities are also possible to change, the occurring role transformation might change the rigid traditional norm in rural areas. And since the rural development requires further steps to eliminate gender gaps and understanding the changing gender roles, therefore, I'm probably gonna following in Jonathan Rick's argument in the rural developments in Southeast Asia that we have to open the black box in the household to examine changing gender and generational roles and relations. Know this, then underpin livelihoods and in turn shape the very special constitutions of the households and the practice of farming itself.
Could you skip this next couple of questions because I think we're really running out of time. We still have 2 presentations.
Well, yeah, I'm just going to the research question as the final flat slide. So my research is trying to understand the process of rural transformation in Central Java as the biggest migrant supplier in Java, and understand how the ongoing process of rural transformations affects the gender roles in Java, and understand the woman's perspective and probably men and their experience of the gender roles dynamic that is affected by the rural transformations in Java. Okay, thank you everyone. I'm sorry for the
Thanks, Linda. Could you, oh, you've unshared your screen, thanks. Thanks for the good presentation. It was very interesting. I'm sorry that my messages asking you to finish didn't get through. I sent several SMS messages, but maybe your phone was off. Okay, I think we might skip questions on this one because we've got 2 more speakers, and if there's time left at the end, we can have any questions for Linda. Okay, all right, Yunie is going to be the next presenter. It's on the share screen somewhere. It's on desktop.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for this opportunity to present my preliminary findings in this forum. I really hope I can get feedback. This would be one of my chapters, one of my thesis chapters. So I'm really hoping I can get feedback to improve my analysis. I haven't analyzed all the data, but this is a preliminary findings. So excuse me. So yeah. I'm interested to analyze how institutions governing the access of the sea, particularly for seaweed farming, because it's recently experiencing a boom period where people start to make it individual properties, and this has been very interesting. The 2 months field work in Sulawesi has been very interesting to me. So in the village of South Sulawesi, you can see the map. In the evening of 2 August 2022, 5 men were playing domino cards in the neighborhood security post, just like any other night. But that night, a man came in with rage and a knife stuck in the back of his shirt. Sudirman, his name, 43 years old. He came to resolve the argument he had earlier that day at the sea with one of the men in the group. His name is Kanaing, 31 years old. Sudirman and Kanaing are both seaweed farmers with neighboring plantation areas. Earlier that afternoon at the sea, Sudirman told Tanaing that he wanted to expand his farm. Tanaing told him that it will take in some of the boatways areas and will make the mobility of the boats difficult. And Sudirman unhappy with the response. So he chose to confront Tanaing that evening. He asked Tanaing angrily, "Who is not happy with me expanding my seaweed farm?" Unbothered, Tanaing answered, "No one forbids it. But if one day your road is broken or damaged because of the boat, don't blame anyone. I don't want to be accused if that happens in the future." Sudirman then jumped and hit Tanaing in the face, but was blocked by Tanaing. Tanaing then hit back until Sudirman bounced back. Then they were separated by the other men. With the spike of seaweed price at 48,000 rupiah, or nearly $5 per kilo, the highest recorded in history, many seaweed farmers in the village tried to expand their plantation areas in any way possible. Some are expanding by taking in some of the boatways areas. Some are expanding closer to the pier, which also could make mobility both difficult. Some are expanding further offshore, but this requires more capital. In another village, still in South Sulawesi, where seaweed farming was established much earlier than in the previous village, expanding seaweed farming is out of the question because the sea is already saturated. However, the practice of buying, selling, and renting the sea space for seaweed farming are becoming more common, with price increases every year, particularly in the last 2 years as seaweed price spiked. Conflict over planting areas, boundary, ownership, and common areas like boatways and beach areas are inevitable. In 2007, Fisheries Department introduced a new seaweed drying technology called para-para, which you can see in the picture. It's a structure made of bamboo. With this method, seaweed dries faster and the quality is better. However, the location is the key because ideally it should be constructed at the beach so seaweed can be dropped off right away and dry right away. Since then, there is an understanding among the community that the beach land, which were previously regarded as common areas, are now belong to those whose house is located next to the beach. They believe that the homeowner has a right over beach area as far as 2 meters offshore. 5 years ago, Daeng Baji, not a real name, built a para-para on the land at the back of Daeng Murni's house, not a real name also. Because Daeng Baji believed that the beach has always been a common area and everybody can access it and use it for any purpose, including to do para-para. However, Daeng Murni disagreed. She believes that, according to the common agreement, it is now belong to her. So Daeng Murni asked Daeng Baji to move his para-para, but Daeng Baji refused. And they went to the village leader to solve the problem. However, the village leader decided to believe Daeng Murni that the beach area belongs to the homeowner and asked Daeng Baji to move the para-para to his own land. Unhappy with the response, Daeng Baji did not take any action. He kept the para-para. Feeling angry and impatient, Daeng Murni took the matter on her own hands. So she destroyed the para-para. Daeng Baji then reported Daeng Murni to the police for damaging private property. As a result, she was imprisoned for 3 months. These are only few examples of conflict over access and property of the sea space, which arise from the commodification of seaweed. At the time of study, seaweed is experiencing a boom period where its price was reported at historic highs. So this graph is only until 2021 and it's experiencing a temporary price decline because of COVID, but after that it increases to nearly 40,000 rupiah per kilo. As a result, many households are shifting from crab fishing and shrimp farming to seaweed. This was also because global market is mainly to the US, is experiencing a glut, and shrimp farming is increasingly unprofitable because of the disease occurrence. As a result, in Pangkep, where seaweed is relatively new, there has been expansion of seaweed plantation areas. Access to the sea space is critical to sustain seaweed production. As seaweed farming expands rapidly, the sea space is increasingly transformed into individualized property, in which access to it is governed by multiple and often contested institutions, This paper addresses institutions intersect in governing access to the sea space in an increasingly dynamic livelihood yet competitive resource access. Most of the studies in sea governance and management focus heavily on legal or technographic aspects. Even on the more micro-level studies in Indonesia, it is mostly about the customary communities arrangements, or what is sometimes called a customary marine tenure. However, I don't think that quite captures the complexity of political ecology and political economic forces which influence the way people access sea space or natural resources in general. So that's why our analysis is situated between the debate on access and property theory and the theory of institutions. Access here is defined as the ability to benefit from things. The things here considered being natural resources and the sea space in particular. Property, on the other hand, is about legitimized claims in the sense that the state or some sort of institution sanctions them. The difference between property and access resides in the fact that while property presupposes legal, customary, or social functioning of claims, access does not, because access refers to all the ways people can benefit from resources, legal or illegal. The concept of access is thus broader in scope than property, according to Weber and Peluso. However, Picard and Land argue that the concept of property to extend beyond access. People may legitimately claim property of resources but may not be able to access and derive benefits from them. That's why concept of access and property overlap what they call as the gray area, that is the claim-making process. In this conceptual gray zone, people seek to move from a position of having only access or only property to have both access and property. And the relationship between access, claim, and property are all legitimized, mediated, or prohibited by the institutions, which are multifaceted and often competing for authority. My analysis is based on 2 months of my own fieldwork in 2 villages in South Sulawesi, and 2 months of preliminary fieldwork by my local researchers, and some data taken by 18 months of studies by our collaborators in the University of Queensland and their field researchers. Modification of seaweed creates property of what used to be the commons, which characterized by open access or in some case community-based territoriality. This is still the case for most non-seaweed coastal villages in which people's livelihood mainly based on catching and trading the marine biota. Within these arrangements, everyone has access to the sea, as sea is treated as common property, like you can see in the picture above. However, in the seaweed coastal villages, the process of making sea as individual property followed what Garcia and Pandit called as 3 practices of claim making. The first one is grounding claim. This happened at early stage of seaweed development when people used bamboo anchor and ropes as the boundary of the sea space that they claim. This visible marker has a strong connotation of exclusion of others. Second one is stalking claims. After they set up the boundary, they will tell other people, starting from their neighbors, so that other people can stay away from their areas and that they can testify their claim when conflict occurs. However, the sea space claiming process does not wind up in the third stage, that is representing the claim, as what is commonly happened on land. Representing claim is when claims are represented on material objects such as maps or title deeds or certificates that are detached from the resource. This is partly because the competing institution within the legal coercion setting, that is between formal and informal institutions, between national, provincial, district, and village governments, and between actors within this institution. And also partly because the lack of access of local actors to knowledge and technology to do the mapping. The provincial government of South Sulawesi, which by law holds the authority to control and maintain 0 to 12 miles of coastal water, has established a zoning regulation of this area, but it remains non-existent to the local community. The provincial government is lacking capacity to enforce this regulation and doesn't show any interest to enforcing it either, because if they enforce it, the complexity of the bureaucracy could obstruct the growth of seaweed production and export, which has now become the priority of the national government. Lastly, the ability to benefit from the sea space or access depends on a variety of access mechanisms, particularly access to capital and market. Farmers with lack of capital were not able to secure large areas of the sea space in the first place because it requires both bamboo and ropes, which they should buy. Similarly, they could also not afford high-quality seaweed seed during the first planting period, resulting in the poor harvest. On the contrary, access to capital allows better off households to claim large or multiple areas of the sea space, as well as purchase high-quality seed, which directly correlates with profits. In Takalar side, these better off households utilize the sea space also to build fish trap and lobster farming, and they manage to accumulate wealth from these activities. In 2007, a new property right known as the Coastal Waters Commercial Use Right, or SP3, is introduced by law number 27 regarding the management of coastal and small island areas, but it has been ruled inoperative by the Constitutional Court. The reason behind the court's decision is that a system that parcels up territory in the sea into segments of individual private ownership with no indication of ongoing management and control by government will be unconstitutional. In the amendment of that law, this arrangement was replaced with permit mechanisms known as location permit and management permit. Location permit is intended to secure the area, and management permit is a license to actually utilize the natural resources within that secured area. The fundamental difference between these permits and the commercial use right is that the permit does not allow for the transfer of rights. So the sea space cannot be sold, rented, lent, or even inherited. The practice of which happens in both study villages. Although villagers are not aware of the specific case, nor the formal permit mechanism to utilize the sea space for seaweed farming, most of them are aware that sea space should not be owned by individuals because it is owned by the state. And therefore, they use the term compensation instead of buying and selling or trading to emphasize that it is the transaction to compensate the labor and capital that the former claimant has spent on that particular area, and not to sell or buy the sea space per se. However, the value of this compensation is not corresponding to the real value of the capital and labor, but more speculative on the value of the location in relation to the distance from the shore and the historical harvest quality and the market price for seaweed itself. It is therefore their understanding that buying, selling, or renting the sea space is illegal, but compensation mechanism is illegal. Another way to legitimize this illegal practice is by recognizing and involving the state, which is represented by the village leaders, in conflict mediation and resolution. In Pangkep, the local state interest in mediating the conflict over the sea space stand for the idea of maintaining the peace of the community, not attempt to govern the sea space per se. Because lack of knowledge, capacity, and formal authority to actually govern the sea at the local level creates an ambiguity of power. It creates an opportunity for the practice of informal mechanisms, which was driven by the economic interest. And that's why its favors largely those with access to capital and markets. In Takalar side, the local village government tries to extend its power beyond the informal conflict resolution by an attempt to formalize the informal practice into village regulation and add some change or additional clause regarding the issues that often cause a conflict. However, many people, particularly the better off households, resist these clauses that are different to the existing practices because they favor the existing practices and they have been the people behind the rules of the game. The nature of seaweed farming requires fixed location and use of the sea. That means it excludes other activities. In Bangkok side, before the expansion of seaweed farming, there used to be many mackerel fishers who also catch grouper, tunas, and other fish using forest gears, including trawl. This activity is now completely disappeared because of the use of trawl to damage the seaweed ropes. Many fishers were transitioned into seaweed farming and crab fishing because these activities are deemed more prospective and profitable, and they could coexist together. Some of them, however, with lack of access and capital, migrated outside of the region, mostly precarious work in Kalimantan and Papua. And many of them returned after seaweed price increased significantly in the past 2 years, but finding access to the seaweed was very difficult. Some of them bought, rent, or sharing the seaweed farms with their relatives. Although crab fishing and seaweed farming could share the sea space, they could not coexist in the same spot or area, as the crab nets could entangle with seaweed ropes. And therefore, and because seaweed farming is possibly more superior than crab fishing, due to its economic value of the capital investment, crab fishers should look for areas so as not to disrupt seaweed farming. Because seaweed farmers are generally in a better position economically than crab fishers who do not own seaweed farming, so they dictate the rules. To conclude, turning access into property or property into access requires a variety of access mechanisms, in which access to capital and market farming. This has facilitated the process of capital accumulation among some seaweed farming households, who step up become seaweed traders. Indeed, as seaweed becomes an increasingly capitalized livelihood activity, it is becoming beyond the reach of the poorest coastal households, many of whom remain dependent on wild-catch marine commodities, such as crab fishing, activities of which is becoming more restrictive due to the seaweed expansion. In the legal pluralism setting, such as Indonesia, competing actors and competing institutions operate to legitimize access claims into property. Here, actors seek out institutions that better favor their claims, that is, in this case, it's informal institutions over the formal ones, and institutions look for claims to legitimize in order to assert their authority, the case of village development in Pakalar. Institutions are continuously changing, seeking and maintaining its authority by asserting legitimacy on property, particularly to its powerful constituents, which in this case is those with better access to capital and markets, such as large seaweed farmers and seaweed traders. Claim-making processes then involve the recursive process of characterized by competing narratives, power and authority between actors, as well as legitimizing institutions. This process produces and reproduces the patterning of organizing practices. Here, I agree with Nurhayati that the patterning of organizing practices is not the result of common understanding or normative agreement, but the forces at play within the field. And therefore, struggle over access and property regarding the sea space is a recursively constituted relation between power and authority. It was not very long ago that seaweed and crab fishing shared the sea space seasonally, particularly when crab markets are in a better position than seaweed. So we are yet to see how this institutional arrangement will compete or adapt to different economic forces induced by the dynamic of global market. That's all from me. Thank you, and I will thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Yunie. Okay, we have time for a couple of questions before the next presentation.
I'll just trying to answer the questions in chat via chat, so everybody can read that.
Sorry, what was that?
Is that okay?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear, Linda.
So the question from the chats, I'll just trying to answer it via chats too. So while the other presentation is going, so
okay, please be quick because we're really running out of time. Look,
yeah, that's the reason I'm answering via chat, so I don't need to answer it.
Okay, can we leave that up after the other presentations?
Sorry?
Oh, okay, fine. Yes, if everyone can see the chat. Sorry, I'm not hearing it well. Okay, look, we have time for a couple of questions. I think what we'll do is get one from the from online and one from the room. Please note that the sound in this room, we don't have a speaker, so if anyone's going to ask a question here, either keep it short so it can be translated or maybe even come up here and ask the question. So the first question is Tias. Okay.
Yes, hi. Wonderful presentation, Yunie, and interesting finding. Just one suggestion, maybe because you mentioned about property and decisions from the Constitutional Court. It might be enrich more to your findings to add the Constitutional Court decision on state control over natural resources. That's the Article 33 of the Constitutions, and not just the decision on the sea-related laws. Several articles from Simon Butts mentioned about this. So with that, the scope and the analysis on the possibility whether or not sea or part of the sea can be owned privately or even by the states. The states not legally own any sea or natural resources. Constitutionally, it's just controlled by, which definition is one of the Constitutional Court decision. Maybe that's all for me. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mbak Tias. Yeah, I will look into the UUD 45. It's just the understanding of the community that the sea is owned by the space, not my understanding. So yeah, thank you for reminding that.
Okay, if we have one question from the room, if there's anyone here who wants to ask a question. No? Okay, in that case, we'll move on to Aya's presentation.
So you can see it in you can see the place.
Wait, you want to fix the camera?
Yeah, sure. Go on there.
No, this one.
PowerPoint here. We unpin Linda.
I think because we're on the Zoom, so it will keep appearing. Yeah.
Linda, if you're able to unpin yourself,
Sorry, yeah.
you're able to sort of unpin yourself, so then therefore we can see Ayu's face speaking instead.
Oh, I don't know what happened.
It's all right. Done. Yeah. It's all right. You were unpinned.
Because it's supposed to be the admin, it's not me. I don't know.
All right.
It's supposed to be the Zoom admin, it's not me.
All right. Yeah, got it. So yeah, good afternoon, and thank you for sharing the session. What I'm going to present today is the first milestone of my PhD work 6 months ago. So, yeah. My research broadly aims to capture how water is made flow in Jakarta Metropolitan Area, and my plan is to understand it through the metabolic lens, which is borrowing the term from Pauline McFarlane, that is to think through how in urbanization process, material like water circulates in and out of space, and that kind of process sort of stitch together different actors. Oh yeah, should I start with here? Yeah, all right. So yeah, that sort of process sort of brings together different actors, human and non-human actors, including the non-human actors, including infrastructure and nature. And my initial idea is actually to think through this lens of speculation, but I'm not really sure if I really should, be very focused on something before I really get into the field, or I really need to keep it broad at this point. So I would really be glad if everyone here have helpful feedback on that. So to give a bit of a context, these pictures represent what is called as Jakarta water crisis today. So the picture on the left, it is showing water vendors tapping water to the jerry cans, and this water will be sold to the informal settlements in North Jakarta, which are largely underserviced by bike water network. And this picture on the right side, okay, so this picture over here, it shows how part of Jakarta is actually submerged underwater, especially here at the north coastal area. But none of this picture actually stands by themselves because water crises are overlapping. So the reason why there's here and subsidence is because people keep using groundwater exploitatively, and why people are using groundwater because they are underserviced by the pipe network. And the reason why pipe network is very limited is because since the Dutch colonial era, it hasn't been much extended. It has been exclusively serving the formal enclaves in the city, especially also with the privatization turn in 1980s. So this is the context of the water crisis. And despite the recent attempt to relocate the capital city, the government of Indonesia actually invested massively on water infrastructure, especially at the periphery of Jakarta Metropolitan Area. So President Joko Widodo regime introduced a new scheme of public-private partnership, focusing on the role of state-owned enterprises to accelerate infrastructure development. So here at the periphery of Jakarta, there are currently being constructed together. This one is multi-purpose dam. These two involve dams are flood control dams, so they're going to be dry dam. And there are also two other water campaign systems being constructed at the moment. So one will be sourced from the Nurhayati in Lebak to serve the west of Jakarta Metropolitan Area, and then sourced from the dam in Purwakarta, which has been serving as the only dam supplying water to Jakarta since 1965. So looking at this picture, all these infrastructures developed at the outskirts of Jakarta signals the total role of the peripheral area in safeguarding the future of Jakarta's water crisis. Despite that these infrastructures are just recently developed, the ideas to increase water supply or control water in and out of Jakarta has been coined since 1923 and then 1949 by the Dutch engineer Van Breen and Blomstein. So this is the idea of Van Breen in 1923 to increase water supply to all Jakarta from the very to Tangerang in the west to the city in the north. And this idea sort of continues today, and this is how it is schematically drawn today. So how the three different watersheds now are sort of territorialized and governed together to support Jakarta Metropolitan Area. And Jakarta is just in the north bit here, a very small bit if you look at the whole three watershed system. And if you look at here, there are more blue triangles than the red triangles, which means that there are so many future potential reservoir large water infrastructure being mapped out and potentially being developed in the future. So in putting all these matters together, I engaged with several core concepts. How far my reading has taken me, but I would really love if you can give me all the feedback around this. So I've been engaging with concept on situational ecology and then post-colonial infrastructure cities and environmental ecology beyond the city. And the one concept which sort of stitch everything together is urban metabolism, which thinking from Susilowati metaphor of glass of water, for example, to think of how water is made present in the glass too. Think of how water is extracted and then how it's distributed, how it circulates, how it is used, how at the same time it puts together infrastructures, body, capital, across different scales, local, regional, national, global, in and out of the city, and how that kind of process of circulation shapes the urbanization, such as how water is, for example, channeled to the most feasible area and then leave other areas on the surface. So understanding this network of metabolism, I'm using Jakarta as a productive site in situating the debate, or in Maryland, unique work to widen the range of sites that speak to theory, not just as inexplicable, but or failed examples, but as particular form of diverse condition. Here, I think the most critical approach is to attend to the everyday practice of accessing resources, because amidst the limitation of the state actors in providing water, controlling water, southern cities are particular because of the plural mode and registers in connecting to metabolism. And this applies not to just the informal part of the city. This idea of metabolism sort of cut across and debunk the whole formal, informal division, because actually the formal sector of the city also connects differently to the metabolism, not only to via the formal pipe network. So through observing the everyday engagement with nature and infrastructure, the notion of power should be understood as less centralized and more diffused to different agencies, such as the human and non-human agencies. Like Furlong and Croy here I cite conceptualize about infrastructure that it should capture both practices and technologies that unite people, nature, and artifacts in complex social politics of water. I also engage with debates in urban political ecology beyond the city, that is to look at the multi-scalar network of human ecologies and infrastructure, and also financial and regulation needs aligned in order to make or unmake water flow. So, in my attempt to understand the water crisis and infrastructure configuration in Jakarta Metropolitan Area, I asked three very broad questions to guide my future research work. The first is how water crises in Jakarta Metropolitan Area are framed by different actors, how urban growth sites are discursively connected through the actors' understanding of water crisis since the Dutch colonial era. So, and then how different actors, infrastructure speculate and respond to water crisis in Jakarta Metropolitan Area. What are the ecologies which enable such response? And then lastly, what are the implications of water extraction infrastructure for land livelihoods and water access in Jakarta Metropolitan Area's peripheral area? This is actually also because looking at the water land nexus, where, for example, large-scale water infrastructure happen at the peripheral area, there is large-scale development being conducted, being carried out. So it would be very interesting to know how such process also shapes the urban-rural water relations in Jakarta Metropolitan Area. As my methodological inquiry, I find thinking through metabolic can be useful here to study how water is made flow in Jakarta Metropolitan Area. First, I attempt to multi-scholar thinking to trace the way in which the materiality of water and the test of the water go beyond their immediate physical context, such as urban rural sites, but also think of urban rural as dynamics. So, to go beyond rural as sacrificing zone and urban as profiting zones. And secondly, I mobilize the damage thinking here to think through the composition and relationality of different elements, which brings together a water to flow. Here, as I quote McClellan, it brings together, for example, water pipes, drains, power stations, to law, policies, and officials. So, in addressing the big, broad research questions, first, to understand how the discourse of water crisis evolves and how different actors frame water crisis, I aim to collect my data through studying water management policy, including something would include archival work, and then conducting observation at infrastructure companies, because most of these new infrastructures is just recently being constructed. So there are a lot of engineering work conducted at the moment. And so also to conduct in-depth interview with different actors. Here I put here the different categories of sites ranged by how actors speculate on water infrastructure. So there are actors with big capital, like developing dams or reticulating infrastructure. And these group of people, I would want to interview people at the Ministry of Public Works, national government, and local government, and then construction companies. But there are also people, there are also actors who engage with small capital in speculating on the water crisis, such as the water business, the water vendors, which I show you previously in the first picture. And then secondly, to understand the actors' response to the crisis, I want to do field observation and interviews. Here with here I also classify it here based on the scale of infrastructural investment. So first, I want to conduct interview with national government, local government, construction company, foreign aid, and rural communities affected by the development of the dams. And then here at the small scale business, I want to conduct interview with water vendor owners, packaged water companies, and local permit offices. Lastly, in looking at the implication of water infrastructure, water extraction and infrastructure, I want to conduct interview with these actors who dealt with managing the impact of water infrastructure construction, especially people, actors who are also involved in the resettlement process, such as the ADB, the Ministry of Finance, local government, village government, rural communities from affected village, and also here I want with more communities, I want to conduct interview with communities around the operation of water business. This is my research plan, my whole research plan. But the nearest thing now is to conduct my scoping work, which is going to be at the end of the semester in November, where I will narrow down the possibility of sites and methods. As a reflection, I can understand how this seems to be like a very broad topic. But I also have been thinking how I mentioned it earlier, if I narrow it down now, with that limit, like how I see my field, when I go actually to the field, things like that. But I've been considering seriously, I've been thinking how to position the idea of speculation within these domains of conceptualized. So yeah, for my scoping work, I guess my target would be to narrow down sites, the kind of infrastructures that I want to engage with during my research, and then maybe from that moving to focusing on which conceptual lens should be developed further, and the appropriate methods to address the research questions. Thank you. Yeah,
That's good.
thank you.
Just sitting around the meeting.
Yes. Sure.
Okay, we have time for a couple of questions, I think. Would you want to stay here for that? So we'll start with someone in the room this time. I guess we didn't get any questions from the room before. Jeff, can you maybe come up here because it's very hard to hear.
Thanks, David. Yeah, I'll go on to down in a sec. It was just a simple question about your methodology, and you mentioned participant observation within companies. I was wondering, you have some background working with the companies, or how exactly you're going to do that? I was curious how you're going to do the participant observation within the companies.
Yeah, you're right. So, I don't have like a direct access to a certain company, but I do have quite experience of co-teaching with people from the ministry who actually could probably introduce me to the companies they're working with, especially because my access, the person that I'm working with is the one who's responsible for the PPP project in one of the dams. So I think that would be like, I don't know, how I get into that broadly, but I'm really, I don't have like direct access, and I would be, I don't know, it would be challenging for me, definitely. So yeah. That's an obstacle. Yeah.
No, I don't know.
Yeah, because
I think it was work by you involved in activity, you participate in activity while observing what's going on in corporate context. How does that work? How do you participate in something?
yeah, well, because at this moment these projects are still under construction, so there are so many engineering works being done at the moment, and I think if I only do interview with the construction companies, I wouldn't get into the depth of the information that I need to get. So I think by understanding, how they engage with engineering works of the dams, I think I would be able to understand more from that perspective. So I feel like, but you're right about how these methods of gathering data are really like very broad, and this is something that I will seriously consider while I'm doing my scoping work. Whether like the possibility of doing that, whether that's really like possible, whether like it would like delay my research just because I'm trying to get access to that inspection companies. But yeah.
Are there any questions from the online audience? No? Oh, sorry, one more. Okay, we've got one more for the group.
Yeah, I'm more curious about the idea of engage the infrastructure is colonized that, and Indonesia is a very young country. It has independence after the Second World War. They were Dutch colonizers, and I also found in the recent one Korean. It's not that they are very
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. So that idea also, got into my head while I was, looking for some secondary data. But yeah, you're right, because the Dutch legacy in water infrastructures are really massive in Indonesian cities, Jakarta especially, and how shapes like the unequal water access today. There has been a lot of research conducted about that. But I think at the same time, the national government is also looking at different actors, different potential partners, investors who can collaborate with us. So the Korean company and the Korean Korean construction company, the Korean the bank, and then the foreign aid, they all participate in the construction of Korean Dam, which is going to be operated by K-Water, and K-Water will supply the technology, the smart water system, to regulate water supply to Jakarta. But yeah, I think that's an interesting question, like how the different international actors and perhaps also political orientation are put together in this water infrastructure. The Korean and the Dutch actually they sort of compete in the reclamation project. So both the Dutch and the Korean win the bid in managing the reclamation project. But I guess you're right, there's quite a shift, or not really shift, I don't know. There's so many investment from Japanese company, Chinese company in infrastructures as well. So it's quite diverse in that sense, but not only Dutch investors at the moment.
Okay, I guess we have time for one more question. Maybe if there's any questions for any of the speakers. Linda seemed to have missed out on that, but any other questions? Yes, Neil.
Asking more about your conceptual framework. So the metabolism and the sediment seem to be relevant. There are a lot of words around there, infrastructures, ecology, yes, I come to these concepts. I'm not accused. Oh yeah, so these come together. The access technology, that's one way actually. It's a bit of an assemblage skeptic myself. So I'm interested in what other frameworks you might have to reach that decision. There are other things, probably natural resources, environmental governance, different flavors of this technology. Why did you end up on a particular lens you're on at the moment?
I think why I was so interested in partnership projects because of the new field that it brings together. I could understand so many times the climatology, but I'm not trying to be smart, but I'm also trying to see diverse actors that actually contributing to new ideas instead of just the same one. And the one non-human like the infrastructure is contribute to that kind of thing. So I think that's how I want to pursue this research. So that yeah, I think that's
Okay, I think we might stop now. It's been a long session. Thanks for the three speakers. Good presentations. Really well done. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to turn off the recording. I can work out how to do it. Yep. I have tried to save the chat, which I can then circulate to anyone who is interested and wants to follow up some of the questions.
Thank you.